My pleasure now to introduce the president of the Public Service Company of Colorado. We talk a lot about Xcel Energy, so PSCo and Xcel Energy in a lot of places in Colorado are just the same, but we have a president who services just Colorado, and she is Alice Jackson. You met her earlier today if you were here. She was on the panel that involved women in energy, and you got to hear her talk about that. I've had the pleasure over the last really couple of years to get to know Alice Jackson, and with all that utilities are doing in the United States of America and all of the sort of tensions that they face, some of the barriers they face, to just have watched Alice operate in Colorado has been a true pleasure for me. I got to be there when Ben Folk, the person who is the CEO of all of Xcel, announced that they would go to 80%, an 80% reduction in emissions from 2005 by 2030, 100% reduction by 2050, and knew at the time, as I sat in the audience, it was the boldest goal that had been set in the United States of America by any major utility. And what I do know is there are a lot of people involved in that discussion and that decision, and Alice is one of them. Would you please give her a round of applause?
Good evening, everyone. Okay, we're going to try that because obviously a little bit of alcohol and snacks has made y'all sleepy. Good evening, everyone. Awesome. That's the way that you want to start one of these conversations. So it is my pleasure to be here this evening to visit with you. Xcel Energy is so honored to be able to sponsor these types of conversations and symposiums. And we're really excited that this has happened now, I hear, 8 years in Colorado. So it's been an evolution, I think, in this conversation in this room, but it's also been an evolution for our company. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey tonight. I'm going to talk for 25 minutes, and then Governor Ritter is going to come up and he gets to quiz me for a little bit, because I heard a couple of questions were kicked my direction earlier this evening. And so he's going to quiz me for a little bit, and then we're going to open it up for questions from you all. So be thinking of what you want to ask, and we're going to have a great conversation this evening before you all get to head out to dinner and enjoy the Colorado nightlife a little bit. So I joined Xcel Energy 8 years ago. I've been in Colorado for the past 5 years, and it's been a transition. Like I said earlier on the panel, I never expected to be in the utility industry. So I have to ask this crowd real quick. Coming out of high school or coming out of college, how many of you had said, oh, utilities, that's where I want to be? Oh, come on, not one of you? So what I will say, though, is in my evolution of moving from an IT professional, and I will say I'm a quintessential geek at the end of the day, that is where I started with a very small company that nobody really knows called Enron. And then I transitioned after getting laid off with 3,000 of my closest friends, via voicemail, by the way, I transitioned over to work for Occidental Petroleum down in Houston. And down there, I got to program applications. But it moved on from there and kind of evolved into procurement of electricity, because there was a little thing happening in Texas called deregulation. And the company I was working for was going through building their own retail electric provider, which is a mini utility. And eventually I got to run that. And my boss, who happens to be in the audience, any of you ever given a keynote with your boss in the audience? It's a little interesting. So this is also my performance review. If you don't see me in a few days, you'll know what happened. But at the end of the day, I was responsible for procuring electricity for all of Oxy's oil and gas exploration and activities in the Texas, New Mexico region. And then eventually that expanded to the chlorine operations up in New York and across the country to a variety of things. Just so happened the gentleman who's in the audience and my boss used to sit on the opposite side of the table from me at Oxy when I was at Oxy, and we would negotiate against each other in rate cases. So I came up through the process of learning who Xcel was in that method. And I transitioned from the oil and gas industry over to the utility industry, and I was asked the infamous question, how can you join the dark side? Really, what I've come to find out over time, it's not the dark side. And what I really hope, and what I said earlier on the panel, is I really truly hope to retire from a utility at the end of my tenure of working. And let me tell you why. And I think it's epitomized by the journey that Xcel Energy has taken over the past little over a decade. So let's go back in time a little bit to 2004 here in Colorado. That was when the first renewable portfolio standard, renewable energy standard, was a ballot initiative here in the state. And at that point in time, Xcel Energy was opposed to that perspective and that particular ballot initiative. Now, some of you might be sitting in the audience and go, I remember that day. And I'll tell you, I still hear from people today, despite where we are today, well, you opposed that back in 2004. But there was a good reason why we came from that direction. Think about, at the basics, what a utility is supposed to provide. Are you okay with voltage instability? Are you okay with flickering lights? Are you okay with intermittent power? I would say for all of the people in this room, the answer to that question would be no. So when you talk about a utility perspective, stability, assurances, knowing what it is that we can provide our customers and doing it at an affordable rate, it is a little uncertain when you start mixing in resources that you don't have control over how much they generate or when they're going to generate at times. So that's where places like NREL come in. That's where places like the different laboratories we have in Colorado, the scientists that you heard earlier today talking about what the future of technologies are and what are the possibilities. It takes those evolutions and looking at that to figure out where are you going to go and how is this going to work. So between 2004, when that first ballot initiative passed, and Governor Ritter's tenure, whenever he increased the percentage of renewable portfolio, we now have a 30% standard by 2020. And here in Colorado, we have well surpassed that particular number. And we've done so for our customers while we've lowered their costs. Now, so let's talk a little bit about what happened over that time for us to get to where we are today. And then I'm going to take you on the journey of beyond what we're still looking at doing. So first off, back in 2006 and through 2010, that was when we were signing those first contracts for wind power. And if you look back at those particular contracts, I'm going to give you some numbers this evening, so hang on. I know you're a little fuzzy after having happy hour. 6.9 cents per kilowatt hour was how much that wind cost. That's fairly expensive wind. That was an incremental cost over the price that it cost us to make energy from our other resources. The good news is time has advanced, technology has evolved, and the procurement that we just did through the Colorado Energy Plan and our most recent electric resource plan was 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour average for that wind energy. Now, is it always going to be that price, is the question that we get asked quite frequently. We had a great opportunity in 2016 as we've made progress through the years on adapting renewables on our system. Between the technology that we've implemented through help with NREL and other laboratories, we've been able to improve the forecasting on our system so that we got more and more comfortable with adding those renewables to our system and figuring out what does that trajectory look like. So when we came to our resource plan, how many of you are familiar with electric resource planning? Okay, that's a good audience. That's more than what I get in a lot of rooms that I'm talking to. But let me just go back to some basics for those of you who aren't just familiar. Every 4 years here in Colorado, we have to go before the Public Utilities Commission, and we talk to them about what are called loads and resources. We have to compare how much generation do we have on our system to what's the size our customers are going to need in order to be able to meet their needs and have high reliability on the system. In 2016, we made such a filing. And what we identified through the process was that we had a need of roughly 450 megawatts, meaning we had to go and build something to maintain the lights and the reliability on the system here in Colorado. No ifs, ands, or buts. We had to add to the system. But we paused. And under the great leadership of people like David Ease, my boss who's in this room, see my performance review is going up now. We were able to look and we said, okay, time out. We're at a crossroads of production tax credits, investment tax credits, the lowest prices we've seen. We think we're going to see even better. Should we do something different? Should we be looking at some of these resources that are closer to the end of life and take a step now versus waiting a little bit longer to take that step? Because it would be in the best interest of our customers, our communities, and our investor base. So when we stopped to ask that question, we got 15 different parties together across this state. And we sat down and we had a conversation. We said, hey, would you be okay? And does it make sense for us to look at this option? But there was a caveat. And we didn't have pricing in at this point in time. We were doing simply the what if. What if this possibility came to fruition? And what we said is if we can bring a portfolio that allows us to close 2 more coal plants, 660 megawatts of coal located down in Pueblo, Colorado, and we can bring and replace that generation with resources in this next RFP for less than building the 450 megawatts, can we bring that proposal forward? The 15 parties got through a lot of hashing out of details and ultimately said yes. We went through an RFP process in November of 2017, and through that RFP process, we had over 400 bids come in. Now, to give you some context, a typical electric resource plan here in Colorado previously had 50 bids. We broke our modeling tool because there were so many bids that came in, which is pushing us to find a new modeling tool because we expect to have those kinds of resource plans in the future and figuring out what the best outcome is for our customers in Colorado. Ultimately, in June of 2018, we were able to go before the commission here in Colorado and say, we can do it. We can close those 660 megawatts of coal down in Pueblo, Colorado, and we can replace it with 1,100 megawatts of wind, 700 megawatts of solar, 275 megawatts of co-located battery storage with that solar, and purchase a 380 megawatt gas-fired generator for $215 million less on a net present value basis than just building the 450 megawatts that we had to build to meet the needs in Colorado. That is that is truly how you can bring the convergence of timing, generation, opportunity, and customer benefits all together in the same place. What it took, though, was taking a step back. But what I'll tell you there is we didn't stop there. My punchline was stolen, but I'm sure you all have read the newspaper articles as well, is the commission approved that particular plan in late August, early September of 2018. And in December, we stepped forward and we once again said, we are comfortable at looking at a continued evolution because that Colorado Energy Plan that was approved will get us to a 60% carbon reduction by 2026 from our 2005 levels, and it will take us to 55% renewables on the system. And I'm not talking greenwashing. I'm talking kilowatt hour for kilowatt hour generated and consumed by our customers here in the state of Colorado. That step forward was going, okay, we can do more than this. We can get to an 80% carbon reduction by 2030. And we believe we can get there with the existing technology today. Now, I won't kid you. We have more software work we have to do. We have more integration work that we have to do. But we will find that path on our way to 2030 and find a way to do it in an economic manner for our customers, with reliability not being impacted. Beyond 2030, as you'll hear our CEO say, we still have a lot of questions. We haven't finished or figured out what the answer is, what the right permutation is in order to solve the puzzle to get from that 80% reduction to 0% carbon on our system. And it's going to take technology. And it's going to take technological advancements that you've been hearing about here today and ones that weren't talked about here today. Whether that ranges from incremental pumped storage to carbon capture to electrolysis that operates in the off-peak whenever the wind is still blowing instead of curtailing it, to then burn in a CT during the day and have zero carbon. I can't tell you exactly what the mix is going to be, but there's a lot of potential for success moving forward, and we will bet on technology any day. So I'm really excited, and I hope you can see why, as a person who comes from the technology side, had no clue about the utility industry, grew to appreciate what it is that we do, but then also is just incredibly excited about being in this industry and continuing to move it forward through the end of my career. This is the type of example that I want to show to my sons, to figure out what is the problem statement and how do you close the gap. We also know that we're not going to solve this problem on our own at Xcel Energy. We need other people to do the research and the development. But more than that, we need other utilities to follow suit. Because the reason that wind went from 6.9 cents per kilowatt hour down to an average of 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour in our last procurement was not because we were the only ones in the country doing it. It's because of the economies of scale, the efficiencies that were gained in those technologies, and where they can go. The same is to be said for solar. Battery storage will follow suit. But we also have some kind of older technologies that might help solve this problem as well. And the one that I'll mention before asking Governor Ritter to come up and quiz me a little bit is pumped hydro. If you go up to Georgetown, Colorado, we have a pumped hydro facility that's 380 megawatts. It's been up there since the 1950s. That has been one of the best resources on our system to integrate renewables going forward. So looking at future potential in that space, you're not looking at a 20-year resource or a 25-year resource. You're looking at leveraging the great elevation that we have in this state and finding opportunities to integrate all of those renewables that we are still looking at on the system. We need, and very clearly I want to state this, we need technology advancement and zero carbon dispatchable resources. And that is the challenge that I put out there to the scientists in the room, to the companies in the room, to the businesses who are looking for, how do we solve this next iteration? We have to find those solutions, and we have to find them cost effectively. Because today, my residential customers here in Colorado enjoy rates that are 36% below the national average. I kind of like that number. So with that, Governor Ritter, you want to come up and commence the quizzing?
It's not a quiz. Thank you. So that was great, Alice. Thanks. I want to say a couple things just by way of introduction. I once spoke down in Farmington, New Mexico after a happy hour. In the morning, Pete Domenici, former senator there, had talked about no regulation of the oil and gas industry. And then people drank for 2 hours, and I was the keynote speaker at dinner, and I said, I think regulation is the best friend of the oil and gas industry. It helps you with your social license to operate. And a woman sitting right in front of me as I spoke said, bullshit. So that is that's my barometer for polite talk after happy hour, and these people were really polite by comparison, I have to say. The second thing I'll say is just how much enthusiasm you bring to the conversation, and I think in Colorado we're really fortunate to have you. We had a couple of questions today. I'm going to reiterate those, but the people who asked those questions I think are still in the room, and if they want to follow up, that's fine. But one of the questions, if you didn't make Amory Levin's presentation this morning, it was a lot about energy efficiency and just how much of the reserve we have in terms of what we need to do to lower greenhouse gas emissions can come from measures around energy conservation and energy efficiency. So from the perspective of the president of a utility, a Colorado-based utility, or a leadership member of a 7-state utility, how important is that to you? And to the extent you think it's important at all, what are the kinds of things that you do to try and go forward with demand-side management or other energy efficiency measures?
Yeah, so I think demand-side management and energy efficiency measures absolutely have a role to play in the conversation that we're having. And you just heard me say it's an all-of-the-above technology strategy. So it's around cost effectiveness and reliability, meaning we have to know when we call on it, it's going to be there. So when we have, I think Saver Switch was one of the energy efficiency DSM measures that we have that was mentioned earlier, where we can turn on and off your air conditioner, your HVAC system at your home. That particular technology, we know nowadays that if you call on a certain number of homes, this is how much you can generally expect to get as the response. But there are more and more sophisticated programs. In fact, when I started my days as a computer programmer down in the ERCOT area for Oxy, that's one of the very things that I worked on. Was figuring out how can you participate in load acting as responsive reserve or actually providing regulation services from chlorine facilities. And it was a fascinating conversation. If Barbara's still in the audience, this is a story you may not know about. But when we went to the chlorine plants and we said, okay, we want to put you on regulation service, they went, you want to do what? Because that meant that we were controlling the rectifier controller that pumped how much electricity was going through the chlorine process. And all of them are compensated based on how many ECUs that you can make. Well, when we made them participate in things like responsive reserve or regulation service, they made less ECUs. So obviously this was a bad thing from management perspective. We actually made more money that year doing regulation services from a large chlorine facility and more profits than we did for making the ECUs because the price of chlorine had tanked. So those are the types of things of figuring out where do you fit it in, how do you get the technology advancements. So I asked my team, because I had a little bit of time between that question and then coming back here tonight, I said, what are the rankings across the country on who performs and how people perform in energy efficiency and DSM? You know, where do we fall on that list? Surprisingly enough, the organization that evaluates it hasn't done it since 2015. So I was surprised.
Is that ACEEE?
Yeah, the last report was in 2015. And at that point in time, here in Colorado, we were 14th. But I know from some of our numbers and comparing against peer utilities, we've stepped up that. I also think that we have a ways to go and more opportunities coming at us. With the investments we're going to be making in the distribution system to add smart meters at all of our customers' homes and businesses, so all 1.4 million of our electric customers are going to see that transition in the next several years, that opens up the door for a lot more possibilities. And talking about what the programs are. The thing I'm most proud of, our DSM and EE programs, we have a robust community here in Colorado that gets together to have conversations around what are those and what do they look like. And I think we've done a really good job of evolving what those programs do and then figuring out what we need to integrate to next. And so I'm excited about where we are on these. I do think it's part of the puzzle. I don't think we're going to get everything we need to close the valley between wind and solar, but it is definitely a piece of the puzzle.
So just if you'd answer a kind of a deeper level question about this that I think people worry about, and that's that the utility business model has been something that it really succeeds on the basis of greater volume and higher prices. And you know, this is now a long time in the making. This is not brand new to you or to utilities, but asking utility to actually control demand and to put in place energy conservation measures goes against the grain of what we all consider the 20th century business model. So how does a utility, when you're in closed doors, talk about something in the 21st century that's doesn't resonate to that 20th century business model?
So I think the direction that I would come at from this one is, number one, I am a huge advocate of getting the right pricing in a customer's hands. And if you get the right pricing in a customer's hands, they have the financial incentive to make the appropriate decisions that keep their costs down. And from that perspective, that limits demand. See, right now, my residential customers in Colorado, they think a kilowatt hour is worth one rate, unless they've signed up for our pilot programs on time of use pricing. And that's really a kind of a dumb signal in my mind, because in the hottest day in the middle of summer, aside from the demand ratchet that we have in Colorado, they think a non-peak kilowatt hour at the hottest point of the day is the same price as the middle of the night. And so if you want natural energy efficiency and natural investment in demand side management, such as our industrial customers are doing because it just makes sense for their bottom dollar, you've got to get that right price signal in their hands. But when we sit and we talk about it, we think of it from the perspective, okay, first off, how are we going to keep bills low for our customers? So we have three strategic priorities. Lead the clean energy transition, you heard me talk about that one. Improve the customer experience, which we can get to later in the conversation, but keep bills low. And in order to do that, we have to manage that highest part of the demand curve. And whether that's addressing it from new technologies that are coming out that are lower priced than a CT, or that's figuring out how to get customers to curtail their load, that's something we have to look at. The model that we are under, there's a lot of skepticism about that kilowatt hour not produced. So customers, if you sell a product, you want to sell more of your product. Utilities are being asked to sell less of their product by participating in these programs. And that is the lost kilowatt hour sold. To the extent that you're decreasing it enough that you don't have any load growth on the demand side, which some of our peer utilities here inside Excel, they experience that as well, it becomes more of a cost problem for that equation. Right. But there are a lot of opportunities we have for figuring out how do you send the right price signal at the right time in order to have a long-term cost trajectory that's incredibly economic for customers. Because we've announced what we've announced on the carbon side, we're looking for those opportunities. Because on the flip side of the coin, in moving into the new technologies, if carbon is what we are chasing, then there are opportunities on that side in order to come to the middle and figure out what's the right path.
So thank you for that response. The person who actually coined the term negawatt is Amory Levins, and he's sitting over there. I was going to ask you a question. We're going to get to transmission, but I think let's segue to the thing you wanted to talk about, which is customer experience, and I think that's a really important part of it. And interestingly, There's two parts to it I'd like to ask you about. One is how you think about the individual customer experience, and then these municipalities that have established 100% renewable goals, that becomes a collective customer experience where they, as a part of a municipality or a town, have goals that you as a utility need to work towards. So if you kind of answer that part A, part B, the individual and then the collective.
Yeah, so I think we've seen a tremendous evolution in customer awareness, right? So many decades ago, people were just like, thank God I have electricity. Nowadays, it's a life right? It's a basic necessity that all of us have, and we expect it to be on 100% of the time. And quite frankly, I would say, my predecessors, they did too good of a job at times because, how many of you walk up to the light switch in the morning and say, oh, I hope this works today? Not many people in this room. So, when I think about the individual customer experience, it's evolved from I need the service to it's a life essential to, I really do care about where it comes from now. And because there's so much more technology and transparency and the age of data, they want to be able to say, well, it comes from here versus comes from here. Now, I think a couple of things I would say. First off, a word of caution. It is still physics. Okay? And the laws of physics are the laws of physics. We can't legislate laws of physics. They are going to happen the way they happen. So we have to make sure that we're staying within the boundaries and figuring out the technology as we go. But figuring out a way to get the customer to the point where they feel like they are able to choose what their options are. Whether that's, they don't really care and they just want to set it and forget it, or they really care and they want to pick rooftop solar or community solar, or they want things like Renewable Connect that we provide from the utility perspective, whether it's wind or solar, whether they want to do energy efficiency. Those are all things that I feel are our responsibility to facilitate for that customer. Same thing for our community side. We have communities that are 100% renewable. We have communities that are 0% carbon. We have communities that want it in their backyard. We have communities that don't want it anywhere near their backyard. We have communities that are incredibly concerned about low income. We have communities that are rural and they love the second crop of the wind farms being built in their areas. It's really about meeting them where they are and having the basic conversation of what are you trying to accomplish and what are your boundaries. And after you establish that relationship, which we've successfully done through the years through what we're calling Energy Future Collaborations and through our Partners in Energy program, you can get to a definition of what does that mean? What does that look like? And then how can we help versus there's somewhere else you need to go in order to solve that problem. So for example, with cities like Denver, we sit down and we talk about the LED streetlights. They just announced that they're going to be converting all of the lights, the 44,000 streetlights here, to LED. That lowers their cost, it improves the safety and security of the city. We're meeting them where they are and we're doing something that we can do. 5G. We've negotiated with all of the communications and cellular vendors so that they have a path forward so that the cities don't have to negotiate with them individually. We can install the devices and it's within the street lighting infrastructure. The biggest concern that you have to face is like what you were saying earlier and talking about the cost shifts. There will always be somebody that wants to go farther than what is the most cost-effective solution for all of the customers on the system. And to the extent that you're trying to meet them where they are, we have to have a path in order to say there is a way in order to make sure that one customer is not subsidizing the rest of them, or one community isn't forcing the rest of the state to pay for what their desires are above what is economically feasible. So that's the struggle that I think we will continue to dialogue about over the next several years. We introduced a bill last year that would have helped with that process. We need to figure out what is that dialogue and how do you meet people where they are and the goals that they have.
I don't see this as a Colorado problem or an XL problem. It's a national problem because it really is, I think, the whole issue about solar and net metering became a cost-shifting problem and a subsidy problem, and we're just going to keep seeing that as there are sort of distinct tastes on the part of individuals or communities. So I want to shift to another question that came up today that was lateraled off to you for later, and it's about transmission. And really, I think with the premise being, if we're going to build out new resources and we're going to build them out in places different than where we've built out central-fired coal generation that's now shutting down, it's going to involve some new transmission. And the siting of that seems to be one of the issues. And we dealt with this in the Clean Power Plan. Some states have it much worse than Colorado, but Nevada's 85% public lands. Idaho's 66% public lands. We're about 44, 45%. This is just federal public lands. So that's one issue, right? Deciding on federal lands. But then, there's not in my backyard.
NIMBY.
Or our center has developed a term. I think we haven't trademarked it. We call it NIMSB, not in my second backyard. For all the people that own second properties or third properties or fourth properties, they really don't want transmission lines running over their property. And so, you're a utility that now has set this bold goal, both around, and you have resource planning to 2025. Get you to 55% renewables. It's going to involve new resources, and then you have another emissions reduction goal. Working in tandem, there's got to be new transmission. And how do you think about transmission planning when the pushback can be pretty severe?
So absolutely, the pushback can be severe. And in fact, I should kick this question to Jerome Davis, who's in the audience, because his group does a lot of the work in our communities in order to be able to figure out where does this transmission go.
We already kicked this question once today, Alice.
What I will say is first off, you've got to be smart. And by that I mean, when I mentioned we're closing the 660 megawatts down in Pueblo, Colorado, there is a long transmission line that goes down to that area. And by the way, one of the ways that we not only were successful in moving that transition forward, we got the community, county and city of Pueblo to sign on to and recommend approval of us closing those facilities, even though they were losing the tax base, and we have about 85 jobs that we're going to have vacated essentially at the plant. The reason I say be smart is because the way that we were able to help that community is we were lucky enough, and I guess fortunate, that the bids in that area that came in for solar can plug in behind that transmission. So don't sit there and just automatically go, okay, you have to build tons and tons of new transmission as you close these other facilities or you repurpose them. There are opportunities in those locations so that our customers can save money. They can get something more economic as you're moving forward with the transition. That is one of the examples of how you can be smart about that transmission planning as you transition your resources and reutilize some of those equipment. Same thing can be said is one of the reasons that we went from coal to natural gas at Cherokee here just north of Denver is because we needed that infrastructure there to support the physics of the grid. So I'm not assuming that everything's going to be on the eastern plains of Colorado or the southern areas for solar or in the San Luis Valley in order to supply the city of Denver. Right now that physically would not work. So yes, we have transmission planning that we need to do. Yes, we need to look at it intelligently across the state of where can those next resources be built. But one of the challenges that I mentioned earlier is the zero carbon dispatchable resources. Those aren't necessarily going to be built out way on the plains. So figuring out what's the best optimization of the existing infrastructure, building onto it where you need to, and then interconnecting amongst various utilities, I think is the smartest way to take a look at it.
Well, thanks. We have about 5 or 6 minutes for audience questions. The first hand to go up is Amory Levins.
Excuse me. Now pick somebody over on the other side, yeah.
I'm wondering what you are doing or how you are thinking about the whole industry's, including yours, upside-down revenue model. What I mean by that goes back to the way Thomas Edison didn't sell kilowatt hours. He sold a lighting service. So when lamps got more efficient, his costs would go down and his profits would go up. In 1892, he was overruled, and ever since, except for streetlights, we've been selling kilowatt hours as a commodity when the customers actually want a service from it, like hot showers and cold beer. And the more efficiently they do that, I think they could do it 4 times more efficiently at a tenth the cost of buying from any utility. The more they get efficient, the more your revenues go down, not your costs. That's why I call it upside down. So are you thinking of getting into the services business to realign your incentives with your customers' incentives, or do you want to stick with kilowatt hours?
Alice?
So I'm a regulatory geek, and this is where I start nerding out a little bit. And my boss is probably going to put his head down in his hands and start shaking it because he knows I love having these conversations.
You are answering a question from Amory Levins. You can be as deep a geek as you want to be. There's an automatic permission.
So you have to remember, I was the one that was responsible for filing like the 40,000 pages of regulatory filings for rate cases and things, and also the one who read them for dozens of utilities across the country. My answer might surprise you. I think for 75% of what it is that we do, the model that we operate under today is still the most effective model to operate under. I think you have a layer of about 25% that we're having a conversation about on should we make some changes and some shifts. Foundationally, I know the word monopoly is usually a bad word. The words natural monopoly, not so much. Because there was a reason for the way that we structured our business many, many years ago, and they really haven't changed significantly to date. But I do believe that we are seeing some evolution in what it is that our customers want. So most of the business that we have is based around the distribution, the transmission, and then the generation power. Generation is shifting. You still need transmission. You still need distribution. You still need the meters. You still need the billing systems. You still need the customer service pieces, all of those kinds of things. That's the 75% that I would say we're still having the same conversation around. And at the end of the day, we're a natural monopoly, which means we have to have a price regulator. And that price regulator is a cost of service-based price regulator. And like we were talking about subsidization before, the easiest way to look at, okay, are customers paying a fair price for the product and the service that we are providing, is to look at that on a cost-based manner. So I still think that's going to apply, not only today, but that's going to continue to apply for a vast majority of what it is that we do. Now, what I find interesting is if you look at history, there are some lessons potentially for the future. So utilities used to finance and service refrigerators, air conditioners, all of those different products and services that customers had. And most of you in the audience are probably saying, I don't remember that at all. But that is what our business used to do. But that was in the time frame in which we were trying to sell more and more of our product. We were trying to grow our business foundationally. And then you hit the tipping point of air conditioning, personal computing, and everything else moving through that time. We're getting to an interesting kind of influx in time, where electric vehicles are now going to be a natural thing that people are buying in their homes. They're incredibly electric intensive, but they also have other opportunities to balance the grid, to do other activities, which then goes, okay, the question mark is out there of, is that now a service? Is that now a different model that you move to? Rooftop solar customers, they still need the distribution system just as much as they did before they put the rooftop solar on. But under things like what we have today in Colorado, net metering, they're not paying for a substantial portion of that. Is that more of a plug-in fee that you should move to? So these are all dialogues that are ongoing inside of not only our company, but many utilities across the country. Different states are approaching it from different perspectives, but I foundationally believe in going through the years and looking at the history of utilities as well as the purpose we're going to drive going forward. The cost-based mechanism and the regulatory model we have today is going to apply continuously to at least 75% of our business. The other 25% I think we're going to see some evolution in, and that's where you might get conversations around performance-based rates. That might be a conversation around, okay, are we providing services like people are now financing, whether it's their electric vehicle, or it's their rooftop solar, or it's a new air conditioner, or a new refrigerator. That might very well come back around to be something that we're talking about not too far in the future.
Well, fantastic. That actually concludes our time together. So, no, it's okay. It's okay. I just think that you guys are to be rewarded or to be commended for the things that you've been willing to do here in Colorado. And I also, knowing a little bit about what I know about the rest of the country, think you're really leaders in this. And so those of us here who pay attention to this appreciate that a lot. So thank you, Alice. Give her a round of applause. Thank you.